अच्युतं केशवम् कृष्ण दामोदरम् अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् कौन कहता है भगवान आते नहीं, कौन कहता है भगवान आते नहीं, हम मीरा के जैसे बुलाते नहीं, हम मीरा के जैसे बुलाते नहीं। अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् कौन कहता है भगवान सोते नहीं, कौन कहता है भगवान सोते नहीं, माँ यशोदा के जैसे सुलाते नहीं, माँ यशोदा के जैसे सुलाते नहीं। अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरम् अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् कौन कहता है भगवान नाचते नहीं, कौन कहता है भगवान नाचते नहीं, गोपियों की तरह हम नचाते नहीं, गोपियों की तरह हम नचाते नहीं। अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम् कौन कहता है भगवान खाते नहीं, कौन कहता है भगवान खाते नहीं, बेर शबरी के जैसे खिलाते नहीं, बेर शबरी के जैसे खिलाते नहीं। अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरम् अच्युतं केशवं कृष्ण दामोदरं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभं रामनारायणं जानकी वल्लभम्
My dear brothers and sisters, boys and girls, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. You just heard a melodious song in the voice of Aditya Pathak, who and whose sister Arunima are two of the less seen and heard architects of the Yes program. The song was that of devotion, a devotion to the divine, and was bringing out the participation of the divine in our everyday life, which is possible. And the reason why we are unable to experience that togetherness, that participation with the divine, is because of our own limitations, because our devotion is lacking somewhere. The divine had been described as Achyutam. Achyutam means the one who never slips, the one who never falters, because the only thing it knows is what is right, and therefore it never deviates or deflects from what is true and right. And then it goes on to say that who says that the divine doesn't eat? It's because we don't feed it properly, and the example given was from Ramayana, one of the epics, one of the most popular epics, perhaps the most popular epic in India, in the Hindu tradition. In Ramayana, there's a small episode in which while Ram was in the forest, he was passing by a place where lived a poor, downtrodden woman called Shabari. And her devotion to the Lord was so complete that when she learned that the Lord is going to pass this way very soon, she collected some grapes for him. Probably she collected those grapes from the wild, because there was not much else that she could offer. And then to make sure that the Lord gets only sweet grapes, because some of those grapes would be sweet and some sour, she took a little bite, or rather bit into the grapes. And those which she found sweet, she kept aside for the Lord, and those which she found sour, probably she ate herself. So she started classifying these grapes into sweet and sour, so that the Lord would get only the sweet ones. But then these had been bitten into, and particularly in India, that is considered something which has been made unfit to eat. But still, when the Lord came, he had absolutely no hesitation in eating those grapes, because those grapes which had been bitten into, because they had been kept aside for him with such sincere devotion. So if that is the type of devotion with which we feed the Lord also eats like us. And then another example given was, who says that the Lord doesn't sleep? It's because we don't put him to sleep the way his mother did. This is one of the relationships which is possible again in the Indian tradition. The divine can not only be the master and the savior, the divine can also be a child, our child. The child-mother relationship can also exist, and that came from Krishna's life. And his mother, rather his foster mother, Yashoda, she is the one who used to put him to sleep with great devotion, naturally the way any mother would. And if we put the Lord to sleep with the same devotion, he would also sleep. So this brings out that while the divine may be to us a remote, nameless, formless figure, the divine also does assume a human form, and then that is how we can become a devotee, because the devotee needs a human form. You can't have that sort of a sense of devotion to someone who is nameless and formless. So when the divine descends in a form that is human and to which we give a name, then you can relate to it as one who can have any type of relationship with you, including that of a child. And so if we put the Lord to sleep with the type of devotion that his mother had to him, or with the type of love that his mother had to him, he would also sleep. So these were some of the things brought out there. And with that little introduction, we move on further. Some of you might be familiar with the name of Robert Fulghum. Robert Fulghum is an American clergyman, and he has written a few books based on some anecdotes into which he has shown a deeper insight. One of the episodes that he mentions in one of his books is that once there was a group of tourists traveling through Greece. And for some reason that nobody knew anything about, they had been offloaded from their plane at a place which was a few hundred miles away from where they were actually supposed to go. And then the rumor going around was that now they'll be sent to the right place, not by another flight, but by bus. And their luggage had in fact already flown to the right place. The luggage had not been offloaded at that place where they were offloaded. So naturally they were all very upset and angry. And as they were passing through the airport to go and rest somewhere where they were told to go, they found that there were very few people at the airport on duty because it was an unearthly hour. But finally they spotted one counter at which there was a young girl, and they all converged there and started bombarding her with all types of questions. What has happened? Why has it happened? What will happen now? And so on and so forth. As in Hindi we might say, kya hua, kyun hua, kaise hua, ab kya hoga? So these were the type of questions that they started asking her. Naturally, she could not answer all of them and all these questions all at once. But in the midst of all this din, an elderly man raised his voice above everybody else's and asked, "After all, who do you think are we? Where are we going?" And to this she did reply. She said, "Sir, these are questions the Greeks have been asking for the last 2000 years, but we still don't know the answers." So these two questions, who we are and where are we going, or in other words, who am I and what is the purpose of life? These are the two questions that we shall address in today and in the next few days. So today the focus will be on who am I. My humble salutations to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. The YES program is a part of the celebrations of the 150th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Our topic today is, who am I? Of course, we are the body, that is quite obvious, but then we are not just the body, because after a person, we say, is gone, has passed away, we see the person is no more, although the body is still there. So it means there is something else besides the body that we have, and that is a spark of life. But then that is something mysterious that just disappears and nobody has seen. What is it that is leaving the body which makes it lifeless? Also, there are many people in ICUs who are alive. The spark of life is still there, but they are sort of in a vegetative existence. They are unconscious. They seem to be feeling nothing. They seem to be knowing nothing. They can't talk to anybody. And we feel, well, life like this is not worth living. And what is missing, in fact, in these people is the mental function, which means that we really feel complete only when we not only have a body animated by that spark of life, but we also have our mind in a functional state. So that we are the body and the mind is something which does not really call for much explanation. But then within the mind we have two aspects, feeling and thinking. And why we are distinguishing these two is because feelings are rather primitive. Even a dog or a cat feels joy and sorrow. That's quite obvious to any of us. But it's only human beings who have a remarkable capacity to think, and that's what sets man apart in the entire kingdom of living beings. Man is the only creature who has the type of capacity to reason and think which no other creature has, and that is also perhaps responsible for man dominating the planet today and having sort of subordinated creatures who may be otherwise far stronger than him and superior to him in many other ways. So thinking is what sets man apart, but then it's not that man therefore has stopped having feelings. Nothing that has evolved in the past has really totally disappeared, and it continues to have an important role, be it feelings or be it a large number of physicochemical reactions that go on in living beings. They have changed not much ever since life evolved on this planet. And what biologists call those mechanisms are well conserved mechanisms. Why have they been conserved? Because they are very valuable for the very survival. So, so feelings are also one of those conserved mechanisms, we might say, which have survived a long spell of evolution. And in fact, the animals which evolved later are the ones who have very strong feelings. And Sri Aurobindo, in fact, calls them the vital. Why does he call them the vital? He calls them the vital because they are vital to life. Because for being alive, we don't need just the capacity to live, we also need the urge to live. And that urge is created by coupling necessities like food and sex with emotions. When an animal is hungry, it is miserable, and in anticipation of the pleasure it will get on eating and the disappearance of this misery, it looks for food. And the same thing if it doesn't have a mate. If it doesn't have a mate, it is miserable, and it knows when it finds one, it will be happy. So to escape this misery and to find that happiness, it starts looking for a mate. So feelings are the vital. And in human beings, they have still more functions, which we shall see in a moment. But right now, let's see what is the interaction between feelings and thinking in a human being. The other day I was talking about, when we talked about the ashram, about the life of the founder of the ashram. When he was a young boy, he heard a talk by Mahatma Gandhi, who said that young people should give up whatever they are doing now and should join the freedom struggle. Now, if it comes to feelings, how would he feel? On one hand, he would feel that becoming a part of the freedom struggle would be something which will make me happy, because I'm doing something for a good cause. Feelings are something that look for whatever feels good. So it would feel good. But on the other hand, he would also think that it will not be a very pleasant experience as such, because I'll be in prison very often, I might be beaten up by the police, I might even die because I may be shot at, and so on and so forth. So it will not be a very pleasant experience. But then thinking would take over, and then he would say that if everybody starts thinking like that, then who would join the freedom struggle? And the country will never be free. So no matter what type of an experience it might be, I should join it. That would be the type of idealism that a young person would have. But then he'll start thinking that, well, I am not the only one available. There are so many others who can join the freedom struggle. Mahatma Gandhi says that just join for a few years, but the country may not be free even by the time I'm an old man. And well, otherwise I might have joined, but that I have so many responsibilities. I have my parents to look after, or my family to look after, and so on and so forth. So you can see that neither the feelings nor the thinking really help the person decide what the person should do. Feelings trying to pull the person towards what feels good, and thinking is capable of giving reasons for doing something and also for not doing something. Let's take another example, which is much simpler. Suppose a person who has a good income feels that I have a good income, but so much of it I have to give away to the government as income tax. So he doesn't want to pay that much tax. And he knows that there are ways and means of evading it. And his chartered accountant tells him, yes, you don't have to pay so much income tax. I'll tell you all the tricks by which you can conceal part of your income. And don't worry, nothing will happen to you. Everybody does it. And then he starts thinking, well, if everybody does it, I can also do it. But then something else tells him, but all the same, the risk always remains. I might be caught. But then he thinks that, well, I know it is wrong to evade taxes, but then the government doesn't necessarily make the best use of the money. I'll keep the money and then give it away in charity. that would be much better than giving it to the government. So once again, you see that he's feeling tempted to conceal a part of his income that feels good right here and now. But then when he starts thinking, on one hand, he's afraid of the risk that he's taking. On the other hand, he's finding so many reasons why he should keep the money. And his chartered accountant has encouraged him, so he thinks that an expert has said that I can do it, so perhaps I can do it. The risk involved is minimal, negligible, perhaps not there at all. So this interaction goes on in his mind. So you can see that there can often be a conflict between our feelings which pull us towards what feels good right here and now, but thinking quite often contradicts it, because that thinks in terms of the long-term implications. It also thinks in terms of what is good and bad. That is what thinking is capable of doing, and that is the legitimate function of our capacity to think, to be able to govern and moderate our feelings so that we are not led astray. But then thinking is not always able to play that part. And that happens not only in things like joining or not joining the freedom struggle, paying taxes or not, it happens even in everyday life. Suppose a person goes to a party and he finds a lavish spread of food. He feels like eating everything and a lot of it. So that's a temptation. But then he starts thinking, it's not good for my health. The doctor has told me that you should avoid eating this and that. But then he starts thinking, well, the hostess has worked so hard on the meal. She'll feel bad if I don't do justice to it. I can eat well today, and I can compensate for it tomorrow by eating less. Maybe I can go on a fast tomorrow. Which means that whether it comes to big decisions or small choices in everyday life, we often face this conflict between feelings and thinking. The feelings trying to pull us towards what feels good right here and now, and that can be very tempting. Whether it is tax evasion or whether it is food. And rationality, or our capacity to reason, of which we are so proud, is not much help, because on one hand it can save us from temptation. It gives us reasons why we should not get tempted, because of the ethical implications, because of the long-term implications for our health, because of the risk that may be involved. So because of all this, thinking does try to guide us properly, but then the feelings are so powerful that we often give in to them and take support of the reasons which support what we feel like doing, because those reasons are also available. There are reasons to support eating more. The hostesses will feel so bad. There are reasons to support not joining the freedom struggle. I have so many responsibilities, and so on. There are reasons for tax evasion. I'll give the money away in charity. That will be much better than paying it away as taxes. So the feelings are so strong that they can compel the intellect to invent reasons which support what we feel like doing. And that's what Sri Aurobindo says, that the leader becomes the follower. Thinking, which is supposed to be the leader, fails to remain the leader. It becomes a follower because of the compulsive effect of feelings, because of feelings dominating us. So while we are very proud of our capacity to think and reason, actually our life is dominated by our feelings. To sort of show the comparison between feelings and thinking, emotions are very quick in giving their verdict. This is what I feels good, therefore let me do it. Intellect, on the other hand, is slow, because it goes into a detailed analysis, a cost and benefit analysis, a risk and benefit analysis, profit and loss analysis, and so on and so forth. So it's a highly time-consuming process. Emotions lack clarity. We feel like doing something and we feel like doing just the opposite also. Both can happen. I feel like joining the freedom struggle because I'll feel good doing something good, but then I start fearing I'll have to go to jail. So emotions lack clarity. The intellect, on the other hand, because it goes into an elaborate analysis, can give us at least a temporary clarity. I have done such a thorough analysis, now I know what I have to do. And we feel for some time that, yes, this is what I should do. But then that clarity is temporary because after some time, we start going over the analysis once more and find that certain factors had been overlooked. And when we take those new factors into account, we reach a different conclusion. That happens so often with reason. So it's only a temporary clarity. Emotions can be both idealistic and selfish because doing something really good also gives us joy, and on the other hand, doing something which may be selfish in itself also feels good. So the emotions can be both. And that applies also to the intellect. As we saw, it can find reasons for what is idealistic and it can find reasons for what is selfish. Emotions don't need any reason. I feel like doing it. It will feel good. I like it so much. And that's why I want to do it. So really no reason is required for emotions. Emotions are non-rational. I'm not calling them irrational because everything that is not rational is not necessarily irrational, because irrational has a certain flavor of being negative, as if it's something always wrong. Because emotions can be sometimes non-rational but pull us towards idealism. And that's why emotions can be called just non-rational rather than irrational. In fact, in Sri Aurobindo's terminology, we might say emotions can sometimes also be supra-rational, which means they can make us do things which may be better than what we feel we should be doing on the basis of that profit and loss and risk and benefit analysis of the intellect. Intellect, on the other hand, at its best is rational, and in fact, even for doing something it gives us reasons, for not doing something also gives us reasons. So it gives us reasons in the same situation for doing something and for not doing it. But at the same time, it is rational. That is its best achievement. So this is sort of the comparison between the emotions and the intellect. And at the end of it, we feel that on the whole, perhaps the intellect is more reliable if we let it work. It's feelings that lead us astray. This raises two questions. Should we kill our feelings? Because if we kill our feelings, then the intellect will be free to do its job properly. And therefore, the main problem is our feelings. So should we kill them? The second question is that if reason is also not totally reliable, because it can give us reasons for doing something and for not doing something, is there something more reliable than reason to guide us? Let's take the first question first. Should we kill our feelings? In general, I have asked this question several times to many groups to whom I have spoken. Nobody agrees. What will be life without feelings? It will become so colorless. But then that is not the only reason why we should not kill our feelings, although some religious and spiritual traditions would have us that we should. But not Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's integral philosophy. Everything that is there in us is with a purpose. The basic reasons for survival, for which feelings are important, we have seen. But then in human beings, the function of feelings goes beyond just motivating us to look for food or a mate. In human beings, if anything, feelings have acquired an important additional function. And that is doing something really great and worthwhile. Because nothing great and worthwhile happens without strong emotions unless we passionately want to do something, what is called in Hindi, junoon or Urdu. जब तक जुनून ना हो नहीं करेंगे. So unless we are passionate about doing something, we will not do it. Because everything great and worthwhile needs a lot of sacrifice in the usual sense of the word. It needs overcoming difficulties, hurdles, obstacles, struggle. But still we do it because we enjoy. There's a joy in doing something what we are passionately involved in, and that's why we acquire the courage to overcome all the hurdles that we may face, be it climbing the Everest or being it going to the moon. These are all things which people have done, which human beings have done, not because they didn't involve difficulties, not because there was no risk involved. In all these things there are risks. People have died while uh, going in a spaceship, and people have died also while climbing the Everest. Everybody knows it. But still, new expeditions keep going to the Everest year after year. Why? Because I feel like doing it. Just that, no other reason is necessary. And therefore, we should not be killing our feelings. Leave aside great things like going to the space or climbing the Everest. Take something very ordinary, like just getting married. Why do people do it? Because they feel like doing it, because of the happiness that they anticipate. Although they see all around them that people are having difficulties in life because of this one thing, getting married. And yet, the feelings are so strong that they do it. And what is the importance? It is again something important and worthwhile. Because if everybody were to not get married because of the fear, because of everybody around us having problems because of that, then the world will cease to be. So, everything worthwhile, including getting married, happens only because of strong feelings. So, feelings are not to be killed, but then since feelings can lead us astray, what should we do? Feelings should not be killed, but they should be educated, transformed, purified, refined, but not killed. And how that happens, how that can happen in everyday life, that is what we shall see today and in a few of the subsequent sessions. How we can have the feelings and yet see to it that they do not lead us astray. Now we come to this. So, feelings should not be killed because feelings are behind everything great and worthwhile that we do. Now we come to the second question. Is there something more reliable than reason to guide us? Because reason, we have seen, is not enough. It can make us do what is right, but it can also give us reasons for doing just the opposite, which may not be right. Now, let's try and reflect on once again the life of the founder of the ashram, who felt like joining the freedom struggle because of the joy he anticipated, and then also had a number of reasons to discourage him from joining the struggle because it may take much longer than just a few years that Gandhiji has said, and he had responsibilities towards the family and so on and so forth. But what is it that made him actually join the freedom struggle? Not this elaborate analysis based on reason, but something deep within that told him that is the only right thing to do. So there is something within us which can guide us towards what the right thing to do is. Also, let's take the other example of the taxpayer who has been given all the assurance by the chartered accountant that you will get away with it, nothing will happen to you, everybody does it, and so on and so forth. Nobody will ever know. And he's also very tempted to do it. But still sometimes he may tell the chartered accountant, no, I don't want to take the risk, I will not do it. Now what is it that makes him so emphatic about saying that I will not do it? Again, something deep within which tells him that the only right thing to do is what is right, and the right thing is not to evade the taxes, and therefore I will not do it. And he tells his chartered accountant, no, you can use those tricks for somebody else, I will not do it. Now what is it that makes him do it? Not just the fear of punishment, because that is negligible, but something deep within tells him that this is the only right thing to do, and if I do something wrong, no matter how many assurances I have, I will continue to feel uncomfortable. Even if I am not punished, I'll still be uncomfortable. And if I may give you an example from the field of medicine, we had a teacher, who taught us ear, nose, and throat surgery. He used to talk about one of his friends who was also an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, an ENT surgeon. And he said that when this ENT surgeon was on his deathbed, he was very miserable. Not because he was dying, but because he said, when I go up there and I have to justify why I removed the tonsils of so many children when it was totally unnecessary, what will I say? Now, which means that he did it because every other doctor was doing it. He did it because it was very profitable. He did it because he could find some reasons for doing it in terms of the medical literature available. So on the whole, he knew it is not necessary to do it, and yes, he found reasons to do it. Most important, that he was tempted to do it by the way his bank balance would improve. But then somewhere deep within, he knew that I'm not doing the right thing. And that thought that I am not doing the right thing did not leave him. It made him miserable on his deathbed. And now the time had come when he could not find any reasons why he'd do it, and he found it very, very difficult to justify. Which means that this uneasiness, which he had suppressed, brushed under the carpet all his life, had once again emerged and come to the surface, and that is what was making him miserable. Which means when we do something wrong, we get a certain type of uneasiness which we can suppress, which we can ignore, but it never really leaves us and keeps coming up from time to time. So this sense of guilt, this uneasiness, which can become recurrent, is one of the punishments for doing something wrong, which comes from within. Now, what is it that can guide us towards what is right? And if we ignore that voice somewhere from deep within, which tells us what is right, what is it that also makes us feel miserable because we did not do what was right? We knew all along what is right, but somehow we justified not doing it because we could find so many reasons for it. So what is it that is responsible, not very visible to us, not as visible as our feelings and thoughts, but what is it that quickly and clearly tells us at the right moment what the right thing to do is? And if we ignore it, we not only feel guilty then, but we also get uneasy, and this uneasiness, even if forgotten for long periods of time, can keep coming up again and again. So this something which is more reliable than reason to guide us, and which can give us the best guidance, is the soul, the deepest self of the person, and what we hear from there is sometimes called our inner voice. Sri Aurobindo and the mother call this part of the being the psychic being. So what we have ended up doing is seeing what a person is, the body, the mind having these two aspects, feeling and thinking, but that's not all. We also have a soul. Pictorially, what we see on the surface is just the body, the emotions and the intellect. The emotions and the intellect being the two aspects of the mind. But then we also have a soul which may not be so obvious to us. But then through everyday examples, we have seen that we realize that there is something besides the mind, something higher than the mind. And this soul is not there just to give us the consolation that at least some bit of us will continue to live even after we are dead and gone. The soul also has a dynamic aspect which participates in everyday life. And this dynamic aspect of the soul, Sri Aurobindo and the mother have called the psychic being. So the psychic being is the source of that inner voice, the voice of the deepest self, which guides us towards what is right. And since it is the entity which is not very obvious and yet is the one that provides us the most authentic choices, it is important to understand this voice a little more. The mother has called the psychic being the representative of the divine in the human being. So it is the divine itself guiding us through our soul, through our psychic being, through this aspect of the soul. It is the divine that is itself guiding us. The other day we were talking about Krishna in the Gita. He says, give up all other considerations of right and wrong, take refuge in me. means just listen to what I am saying. And although we do not have the good fortune of having Krishna in front of us in flesh and blood, we have a Krishna within, the representative of the divine within, and that is the psychic being. And that is where we should be looking for the true guidance in situations where we can't make up our mind what to do. And therefore it's important to understand the characteristics of this inner voice. It is a rather shy, faint and non-assertive voice. It is a voice that does not insist. It's a voice that is quite content to be ignored. Unlike the voices of the emotional part of the being and the intellect, which can be very noisy. And that is why this shy, faint and non-assertive voice can easily get drowned in all the noise made by the emotional part of the being and the intellect. While it is shy, faint and non-assertive, all the same it is a very clear voice. We know that that is the right thing to do. This will be right, this is wrong. So it's a very clear voice. Unlike the voice of the emotions and the intellect, which lack that clarity. Rationality, which seems to be clear, also leaves us at the best with only a temporary clarity. But on the other hand, this voice leaves us with no doubts or questions about what the right thing to do is. It's a very clear voice. And it's a very quick voice. In a split second, we know what the right thing to do is. It doesn't take time to tell us what is right and wrong. Just a split second is enough. Unlike reason, which is a highly time-consuming process because it goes through an elaborate analysis. And still, the conclusion that we arrive at is not the final conclusion, because if we start analyzing once more, we find that now that we have taken some additional factors into account in our analysis, the conclusion has changed. So it is quick and clear, unlike reason, which is slow and never really truly clear. It is not only a very quick and clear voice, it is also a voice that is coupled with reward and punishment. The reward of doing the right thing is joy and, even more important, lasting mental peace. For example, this person who decides to pay taxes and tells his chartered accountant, you can reserve your tricks for somebody else, I want to pay all the tax that is due. After that, he gets a certain type of joy. It's a paradoxical joy. He's losing some money and yet he's happy. And even more important than that, he gets lasting mental peace. The type of peace which he would have never got, no matter how many assurances he got from anybody. So it is this joy and lasting mental peace which is the true reward of doing the right thing. On the other hand, in contrast, not listening to this voice makes us feel guilty and gives recurrent uneasiness, as we saw, is uneasiness which can follow us to our deathbed. If we were to draw the organogram of an individual, we can compare the soul or the psychic being to the President of India or the King or Queen of the United Kingdom. Now, the head of the state, the President of India or the Queen of England, they have the highest position, but to maintain the dignity of office, they do not participate in the day-to-day affairs of the country. That is what the soul also seems to be doing. But then, who runs the affairs of the country? The Prime Minister. And who is the Prime Minister in the individual? The ego. And it has three ministers: the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect. Now within ministers there is a hierarchy. There are some cabinet ministers and there are some ministers of state. The cabinet minister is senior to the ministers of state, and the cabinet minister of the individual are the emotions, because that is what rules our life. Junior ministers are the intellect and the body, the physical part of the being. Once the emotions have taken over, and they generally do so, the intellect quickly finds reasons to justify what the emotional part of the being wants, and the poor body, it does what the mind tells it to do. Mind means the emotions and the intellect together. So some sort of an uneasy truce is always worked out between the body and the mind, and that is what pampers the ego. In general, I mean, the type of choices that we arrive at through this type of an uneasy truce between the emotional part of the being and the intellect is such that it gives us some egoistic satisfaction. Be it eating some tasty food, be it seeing our bank balance grow, or whatever it is, all these things boost our ego. So the ego is the prime minister, and to keep it happy, its ministers keep arriving at some sort of an uneasy truce, and they achieve some temporary peace by working out some sort of a compromise. So that is what they are doing, and this is what we are quite aware of, because this is the surface of our body, the ego dominating our life and pressing into service these instruments, the body and the mind. And in fact, much of modern psychology revolves around exactly this. In fact, gives a great importance to the ego. It does have importance also. I'm not saying that it is all bad. In fact, unless the ego is consolidated, the person can have serious personality disorders and can become very ineffective in life. So the ego has its importance, and that is why it has been planted there. Maybe there will be an occasion to talk about the ego someday in greater detail, why it is there and what purpose it serves. That is also important. But all the same, there is something else to an individual, and that is our soul. And while the soul may be aloof like the President of India, it does have a secretariat. It has a secretariat through which it can put in a word when it feels absolutely necessary. And that is, this secretariat of the soul here is the psychic being. So that is sort of a way we can look at what an individual truly is. A question which is often raised is that when we make the right choice, is it the heart or is it the soul? Why did you do this? Why did you jump into the water, cold water, to save somebody who was drowning? I came from my heart. I knew it was the right thing to do. That was the only thing to do. I didn't really think what else I could do in that situation. And that came from the heart. Now, what is heart? Refers to the emotional part of the being and sometimes to the soul. What is it that is common to both, and why do we feel it came from the emotions rather than from the soul? It feels so because both the emotional part of the being and the soul are non-rational. Neither of them works on the basis of reason. Secondly, why it happens is that when a person listens to this voice and does what feels good, the person is not only doing it because it is the right thing to do, the person also anticipates a great joy in doing it. And it is the function of the emotional part of the being to look for that joy, to experience that joy. So it is in anticipation of that experience that the person is doing it without realizing it. And therefore, the voice of the soul has become the same as the voice of the emotional part of the being. And later on, the person may also find some reasons for having done it, and therefore the intellect also joins. Now this is what we may call is the unification of the being. So every time the person does something right, the person is experiencing this unification. The person is doing it because the inner voice says so. The person is doing it because the person knows that it will bring joy, and the person has perhaps by then also quickly found a reason for doing it. Now this is the unification of the being, sometimes called the union of the body, mind and spirit. Body, the physical part, the mind, and the spirit is more or less the same as the soul. So it is this unification of the being which happens temporarily every time we do something right. Because at that time we have no split. We have no sort of two ideas in our mind, and that's why we quickly do what has to be done. And it is generally done only when we do it soon after we feel that I should do it because it is the only right thing to do. If we delay it, perhaps the intellect will take over and we'll find many reasons for not doing it. That is what we call the process of sliding down. That is, if we don't do the right thing at the right time, quickly, then we can slide down to the lower level where the intellect will take over and start giving us all the losses involved, all the risks involved, etc., in doing the right thing. So, but during that brief period when we just do the right thing, they have all come together. And because both these parts, the heart and the soul, are non-rational, we sometimes feel it came from the heart. This I may briefly touch at this point because it will be quickly understood, although we'll come to it in greater detail when we go to the purpose of life. If a person makes this type of choices which come from the soul and which unify all parts of the being frequently enough, then what will happen is that the emotional part of the being and the intellect will start undergoing a transformation. Which means that this will become more and more habitual for this person to be able to anticipate and see in advance the type of joy which the right choice will bring. And the result is that more and more often his heart or his emotional part of the being will start speaking in the same language as the soul. And once that has been done, much of the battle has been won because the intellect quickly falls in line. Then the intellect will also get trained to speak in the same language and will start giving the type of reasons which would support the choice made by the soul. So if the soul is giving us a clear verdict quickly about what is to be done, and the heart also speaks in the same language, and the intellect quickly gives reasons to support it, then what it will mean is that the usual conflict between these parts of the being, the emotional part of the being, the intellect and the soul, will disappear. And if this happens in such a way that it becomes habitual for the person to always make these choices in which all these three parts are speaking in the same language, then in fact that would be a total harmony, a total unification of the body, mind and spirit. Now, it is not easy, it is more than a lifetime job, but every step that we take in the direction of this unification brings us more and more of the type of things that we are all looking for, like joy and lasting mental peace. We all want it, and yet we fail to get it because we are not able to harmonize these parts of the being which are in conflict. That's why Sri Aurobindo says on the very first page of the Life Divine that much of the human problems, all human problems perhaps, are essentially problems of harmony. Harmony of what? Harmony between different parts of the being, particularly the emotional part of the being, the intellect and the soul. So it is this disharmony which is at the root of all problems of human existence, and harmony is the solution to all these problems. So there's one basic problem and one basic remedy. There is none other, no matter where we keep looking for happiness. And that is why, because we are looking for happiness at wrong places rather than in this type of harmony, that happiness keeps evading us. We get short-term thrills, pleasures, but true happiness, which in fact lies in lasting mental peace, that is something that continues to evade us because we are not able to work out this harmony on a long-term basis, because occasionally we may all do something good and achieve this unification, but transformation of these parts of the being, the emotional part of the being and the intellect, is a long journey, and therefore these type of conflicts do keep coming, and that is what creates the problems of human existence. So the solution to all these problems lies in this transformation becoming a constant feature so that we can organize our life around this unified being. That is where the solution lies. And because this voice of the psychic being is so important, let's try and now see once more whether it is really the psychic being. Because the ego can be very tricky, and even if the voice is coming from the ego, we can find a number of reasons to feel convinced that it is coming from the psychic being. And therefore, this is an important question, and the mother says, it does take a very long time for a person to even discover the psychic being, leave aside listening to it all the time. For that, there are four crucial questions based on Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita. Four crucial questions which we can ask ourselves to decide whether it is really the voice of the psychic being. The first question is the choice based on egoistic considerations? Is it a choice that in some way satisfies my egoistic desires, like those for sensory pleasures or for power, position, wealth? These are all egoistic considerations. Is it a choice based on some such consideration? Is the choice based primarily on considerations of worldly gain or loss? Now, if it is based on, now again here the word important is primarily. Is the choice based primarily on considerations of worldly gain or loss? It's not that the right choice which comes from a psychic being should always lead to a worldly loss. But that is not the primary consideration. Whether it is gain or loss, that is secondary, that is incidental. The choice should be based not on that consideration. So the basis of the choice primarily is not worldly gain or loss. Now these are two questions which should be answered in the negative if the voice is coming from the psychic being. Which means, is the choice based on egoistic considerations? If it is not, it is likely to be the voice of the psychic being. If there is any trace of the choice being based on an egoistic consideration, it is not the voice of the psychic being. In the same way, if the choice is based primarily on considerations of worldly gain and loss, it cannot be the voice of the psychic being. If it is independent of these considerations, then it may be the voice of the psychic being. The other two questions are of the type which should be answered in the positive. Is the choice based on love that is universal, unconditional, and does not expect anything in return? Now these are the characteristics of true love, or what we may call divine love. Is the choice based on love? Not love for someone with whom we have a relationship, particularly a biological relationship. Is it for a child, a biological child, or is it something which is irrespective of such considerations? Is it based on some other narrow-minded considerations, like the person belonging to my neighborhood, belonging to my extended family, or belonging to the same religion, or speaking the same language, or belonging to the same country? Now these may be pretty wide considerations, broad considerations, but still they are not universal in nature. If the choice is independent of if the love is independent of all such considerations, then only it is universal. That doesn't mean the generalized idea that I love all humanity. That is very easy to say. What is difficult is to love a real human being. So it can be for a real human being, but then the love is not based on any such narrow consideration. It can be also something which involves this narrow consideration, but it is not because of that, it is independent of it. It doesn't mean that therefore you cannot express your love to your own biological child. But what it means is that it's not because it is your biological child, but because a similar love would be conferred in a similar way on somebody even if it were not your biological child. So that is what universal character means. So it can be for real people, but it should be independent of any narrow considerations. It should be just because at that moment you feel that this is what this person needs and this is what I can give. So long as that fit exists, you don't think beyond that. Or since there is no ego involved here, you don't look at whose need it is, whether it's my need or somebody else's need. You just look at which need is more important. This person's need is more important, therefore let me give what this person needs. So that is what universal love means. So is the choice based on love that is universal, unconditional? Again, something similar. It doesn't depend upon this person being good or bad, this person being worthy of that love or not, this person deserving that love or not. It is completely independent of those considerations. For example, doctor would not think that this person is someone who is a terrorist. Suppose there's a terrorist who is there in front of him as a patient. He doesn't think of that. His duty is only to treat the patient to the best of his ability. So it's unconditional. It's not dependent upon there are some considerations. And the love that comes closest to it in real life, ordinary worldly life, is the love for your child. You may tell the child that if you don't get good marks in the exam, I will not love you. The child fails the exam and yet you continue to love the child. So it may appear conditional, but it is actually unconditional. So that is what unconditional love is about, and does not expect anything in return. Again, that is the characteristic of true love. And a person may feel that all my love is without any expectations, but most of the time there is an expectation. If nothing else, at least one expects gratitude, appreciation, and things like that. But even that should not be there. So is the choice based on love that is universal, unconditional, and does not expect anything in return? If you answer this question in yes, then it is the voice of the psychic being giving that choice. And the last question, which is the most crucial, is will the choice leave me in lasting mental peace? Why this question is most crucial is because one may be able to convince oneself, well, it is not because of my egoistic satisfaction. I don't care what I get or I don't get. So it is not based on egoistic considerations, and it's not based on considerations of worldly gain and loss. I don't care for that either. And it is based on love. I'm doing it out of love. One may be able to convince oneself about the first three questions. But when it comes to the last question, if one just tries to answer it in total honesty, one would know whether it is truly the voice of the psychic being. Because it is only choice that comes from the psychic being which will leave the person in lasting mental peace. Which means the person will feel that I had done the right thing and therefore will be at peace even on his deathbed. So that is the most crucial question. Will the choice leave me in lasting mental peace? If the answer to that question is yes, then only it is the voice of the psychic being. Now here are a few experiential exercises for you which you can do anytime later. Firstly, in a meditative state, when you are meditating, try and think, am I only the body and the mind, or is there something behind their workings? You'll find that the way the body and the mind work is itself such an amazing miracle, amazing feat as to be considered a miracle, that you feel that there must be something behind the way they work. And what is it that is behind that? Something higher than the body and the mind. Because while I mean using a machine properly may be okay, but then the one who has made that machine is certainly higher than the one who is just using that machine. So instead of thinking that we are the body and the mind and therefore identifying ourselves the one who uses the machine, let's try and think, who is it that made this marvelous machine? And you'll feel that feel the presence of the one that made this machine also within you. So it doesn't require actually much more than that to realize who we really are and what we really are. So just try and reflect on this. Whether I'm just a machine or do I have something within me of the one that made this machine? Another reflective question is, think of a major morally right choice that you made. And you must have made so many by now in your life. Did you know that was the right choice before you rationalized it? You know, in retrospect, you may be able to rationalize what you did and why you did it. But when you actually made it, did that initial impulse to do it come from somewhere else? If it came from somewhere else, that was your psychic being. Think of a major morally right choice that you made, and did you know that was the right thing to do before you invented reasons for it? Third thing that you can again meditate upon, do you have a dark secret that nobody knows anything about? Everybody has some such secrets, things which you feel were not the right thing to do and yet we did them. Do you have a dark secret that nobody knows anything about and nobody can ever know? why do you still remember it? Just try and think why it refuses to fade away from your memory. It was long back, nobody will ever know it, so you can never be punished for it. But why do you still remember it? And why do you sometimes feel uneasy about it? The fourth, what made you join this course? It looks like a silly question, but then this may have something to do with what will come in some of the subsequent sessions, or in general in life. Is it that we find reasons for doing something and reasons for why we ended up doing it? Or is it that some unseen force guides us in a certain direction which becomes an excuse for doing it? There might be some totally unforeseen incidents which guided you to this course and you ended up joining it. So try and think of that unseen force. You might have found later on many reasons for joining it, but before those reasons might have happened some very ordinary unforeseen things, like talking to a friend and this suddenly coming up in a conversation, or something suddenly appearing in your email which you initially thought was junk mail and yet you ended up seeing it. Or it could be that you were just navigating the net and somehow in a mysterious way you got guided towards this course and you discovered it. So it could be any such thing, and again you feel that, well, it happened because somebody guided me to it. Somebody was some higher force which created those circumstances, those little events which made me join it. Here are a few lines from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri to illustrate what we have been talking about. An inspired knowledge sat enthroned within, whose seconds illumined more than reason's years. An ictus of revealing luster fell, as if a pointing accent upon truth, and like a sky flare showing all the ground, a swift, intuitive discernment shone. Now, this is a beautiful description of the psychic being. What is it? An inspired knowledge. It's not knowledge in the ordinary sense, not knowledge of the type that we get in schools and colleges. It's inspired knowledge. And because of its eminence, it sits on a throne. It's enthroned within. It is there within us, and it occupies the highest position, the position of the head of the state. It sits on that throne. And what is it capable of doing? Whose seconds illumined more than reason's years. Within seconds, it can throw more light on an issue than years of reasoning. An ictus of revealing luster fell, as if a pointing accent upon truth, and like a sky flare showing all the ground. So these are all different ways of showing how quick it is and how it can suddenly illumine something which seemed to be hidden somewhere in the dark, as if, It's like a pointing accent upon truth, or like a sky flare showing all the ground. Sometimes in disasters, when the effort is to find those who are trapped in that disaster and rescue them, the helicopters fly at low altitude, but still they may not be able to see clearly what is on the ground, and they use these sky flares, which create a very brief but extremely bright light which can show the ground so that they can spot where those trapped in the disaster are, and they can go and rescue them. So it's a beautiful analogy of what the psychic being does. It's momentary, it's quick, but it is so bright that it can quickly reveal the truth to us. And the result is a swift, intuitive discernment shown. We quickly know what the right thing to do is, and it looks like an intuition, something that came from within, from a level higher than reason. One glance could separate the true and false. We quickly and clearly know that now I know what is right and what is wrong, what is true, what is false, what is good, what is bad. You know what we call in Hindi? Doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani. What is milk? If you have milk and water, if you dilute milk with water, It's impossible to make out the two. But something which can truly discern can show even in that mixture where the water is and where the milk is. So one glance could separate the true and false. So that sort of discernment, which can even separate milk from water. One glance could separate the true and false or raise its rapid torch fire in the dark. Torch fire is, again in this situation like that sky flare. To check the claimants crowding through mind's gates. Why is this type of discernment and this type of light important? Because there's no scarcity, there's no dearth, there's no shortage of many other alternative choices claiming to be the right choice. And where do they come through? They come through the mind's gates. Mind's gates means through the emotional part of the being and the intellect. The emotions telling us, oh, this will be so pleasant. I like it so much. And the intellect providing several reasons for doing it. And they can be very noisy, they can create a big crowd, and they can cloud. This crowd can cloud our sense of discernment. This crowd can cloud our sense of right and wrong, even if it was provided to us very reliably at the right moment by the psychic being. That shy, non-assertive voice slips into the background, and what takes over are these claimants of truth crowding through mind's gates. Truth, which is only a illusory truth, what appears to be true but actually is not true. Covered by the forged signatures of the gods, to the extent that these claimants crowding through mind's gates can appear like something which has been signed by the gods. So these signatures can be forged, which means we may get a feeling that this is coming from the deepest part of the being, from the divine itself. But that signature is not a genuine signature. Sometimes we feel that this is the voice of the psychic being. It's coming from the divine. But that appearance can be put on by something which is actually coming through the mind. And that's why when a disciple asked Sri Aurobindo that if I feel that my psychic being is telling me to do one thing and the mother is telling me to do something else, what should I do? Sri Aurobindo said, do what the mother says. Why? Because your voice can be the ego's voice, which is being mistaken as the voice of the psychic being. So just do what the mother says. So it's covered by the forged signatures of the gods. But then what can the psychic being, this inspired knowledge within, do? It can detect the magic bride in her disguise or scan the apparent face of thought and life. So it can detect behind the disguise where the magic bride is, or it can scan the apparent face of thought and life, what the thought and life might have put on an apparent face. That is, a face that is not truly what it is. The face is that of the truth. The face is that of a bride. The face is that of a document signed by the gods. The face is that of someone who is claiming to be true and is coming in a big crowd. But all this can be scanned to show what is really truly within, like a CT scan. No, so, or scan the apparent face of thought and life. So let's go over these lines once again. An inspired knowledge sat enthroned within, whose seconds illumined more than reason's years. An ictus of revealing luster fell, as if a pointing accent upon truth, and like a sky flare showing all the ground, a swift, intuitive discernment shone. One glance could separate the true and false, or raise its rapid torch fire in the dark to check the claimants crowding through mind's gates, covered by the forged signatures of the gods, detect the magic bride in her disguise, or scan the apparent face of thought and life. This occurs in Savitri in Book 1, Canto 3. Suggested reading for today. in this book, uh, Understanding Spirituality and Living It 24/7. The subtitle is Real Questions, Rational Answers. You'll find this in the first chapter from pages 17 to 47. And I gave you a few examples of the conflict between the uh, emotional part of the being and the intellect, and how the voice of the soul can help us sort out the issue. You'll find many more examples in this book, probably at least 15 examples in this chapter. And those examples evolved gradually because we get different types of groups coming to the ashram, and to explain this conflict and to make this voice of the psychic being understood, I had to keep thinking of different types of examples, some which would be more suitable for school students, some for college students, some for the business executives coming from the corporate sector, and some for doctors, and some for teachers, and some for Indians, and some for foreigners, and so on. So for all these groups, I had to think of a different type of an example. And so that's how these examples evolved, and they will find a collection of at least 15 such examples. Why I have done it is because this is one of the most crucial things. If one understands this, then much of spirituality is in fact understood, especially spirituality which can be brought into everyday life. So the psychic being is actually the heart of the practice of spirituality in everyday life, and therefore this is a very important concept to understand. And that's why I put more than 15 examples in this book, and it's difficult to talk of all of them in a course. So this is the chapter there. This book is available as an ebook on Amazon, and for a hard copy you can drop an email to saf150yes@gmail.com, the email with which you are familiar, and we'll organize to get it sent to you to any part of the world. We can courier it. Okay. And the source for all this knowledge, I am only a channel to communicate it to you, are these two books. Of course, Sri Aurobindo and the mother's works are full of all this, but the books where this forms the major topic are The Life Divine, which in fact the whole book is about what we will have talked about today and we'll talk about in the next few days. And therefore it's difficult to give, as I've been doing earlier, the exact page numbers to which you should go, because this is scattered throughout the book, and the book is about what we have talked today and we'll talk in the next few days. So the book as a whole is what is important. We can't sort it out into page this to this. And same applies also to Savitri to a large extent, but if you want a poetic summary of what we have talked today and we'll talk in the next few days, probably the best recommendation would be Book 1, Canto 4. The title is the title of this canto is The Secret Knowledge. So you are now getting to know some of the secrets of human existence. The Gita also has a similar title, Guhya Gyan, the one which is secret. And then this, of course, Spiritual Wisdom in Small Doses, which is available for free download as a PDF on yesspirituality.wordpress.com. You'll find essays on the ego, psychic being, soul, and just about every topic, every sort of term that we'll be touching upon in this series of talks. Your questions and comments are welcome, and the email is sa150yes@gmail.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making it all possible, and thanks to all of you for joining in and listening patiently. We can take up today, and then since today's talk and some of the subsequents are a continuity, some of the questions may get answered in the subsequent sessions.
Namaste, Bhaiya.
And Namaste, Manan.
My question is on Sri Aurobindo's aphorism, the goal, and in particular the line, ego was the helper, ego is the bar. You had narrated a story to explain this to me, and that had been very helpful. If you could share some of those thoughts, it would be very nice. Thank you.
Actually, I don't know which story I told you because I keep telling so many stories. Why don't you tell the story yourself briefly? Of course.
No, the one I don't recall it in the right flow, but the one which appeared in the speaking tree, which you had mailed to me sometime last year.
Was it
Okay,
about
never mind.
the person who stepped out of Olympics?
Yes.
Let me try and remember. I think it was a lady who had made it to the Olympics, but at the last moment decided to withdraw. And then, I had tried to sort of talk about the. No. Yes, I think it was about the person, who was going to win and uh, probably stopped by to pick up someone who had fallen, who had ahead of that person and fallen.
Yes, that is the one, right?
Yes. So there's a documented incident of two persons say, participating in a running event in Olympics, and one of them was slightly ahead of the other, but the one who was ahead uh, fell, stumbled, and the one who was behind this person picked this person up, made this person restart, and stayed behind. Uh, Somebody told him that you could have just continued running, you were near the finishing line, and then you would have ended up first. But this person said that would not have been the right thing to do because this person was first, and I didn't want to take advantage of this accident. I would have never felt comfortable getting the medal instead of this person if I had done that. So, this is the voice of the psychic being. Quickly told this person, and the person quickly decided to act upon that voice. What the person lost was the gold medal, but what this person gained was the joy of doing the right thing and lasting mental peace. Because now this person will never feel guilty the way the person would have felt in spite of getting the gold medal if the person had ignored this voice. So that is the voice of the psychic being, and how acting upon it becomes important, if for nothing else, not just because it's the right thing to do, even for what we are always looking for, that is joy and lasting mental peace.
Namaste, sir. Sonika this side.
Namaste, Sonika.
Sir, my question is about the feeling of guilt. Where does it stand in this entire scheme of things? So suppose you you have already made a wrong decision in the past, and now this feeling of guilt is haunting you. Now, certainly the psychic being will keep on reminding you and making you feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, it is not healthy to, retain it. And so how do you go about handling this?
That's a good question. Guilt serves a purpose. At the same time, we should not stay permanently in that state of guilt. The yogic path is make good use of even that guilt and resolve to not repeat something similar in a similar situation. And since similar situations generally don't always come, in other situations, wherever a choice has to be made, this should be a reminder that we follow the voice of the psychic being, which means that we use it constructively, use this mistake that was made in the past constructively for improving ourselves, rather than staying sort of with that sense of guilt. Going on a guilt trip and staying with it permanently doesn't help. A constant sort of self-criticism doesn't help. What helps is making use of our mistakes of the past, do better in future, because who has not made mistakes? Who has not slipped? Only the divine is Achyutam, who never slips, We all slip, we make mistakes, make use of those two. That is the spiritual path.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Bijlani.
Good morning.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insights. I have a question with regards to free will, dharma, and the role of psychic being in directing both. And if you could throw some insights with relation to the dilemma which Arjun faced in battle. Thank you, sir.
There are many questions mixed up in this. Let me try and sort them out and all at the same time try to connect them together. One of your questions was about karma. Now, the relationship between karma and the consequences is sometimes oversimplified. We are not dealing with although I also did mention that reward of joy and the punishment of guilt and so on, but we are not really, that is again a sort of an oversimplification. We are not dealing with rewarding and punishing God. What we are dealing with is a God who is genuinely interested in helping us carry the journey of our soul further to its logical conclusion, which is becoming one with the divine. And for that, the divine provides us a vehicle in the form of life. So every event and circumstance in life is actually an opportunity for going further on that journey. But whether we go further or we go backwards, because that's also possible, depends upon the choices that we make. And those choices are coming from three levels: the emotional part of the being, the intellect, and the soul, or the psychic being. So the most authentic choice is also being provided to us, because that is how we are constituted. The divine has constituted it that way so that we can use those situations in life for taking a few steps further on this spiritual journey. But at the same time, the divine has also given us the free will to ignore that voice and neglect that voice, so that the same opportunity may end up taking us a few steps backwards. Now that is the play of the divine, because otherwise everybody's journey would be over in less than a lifetime if that free will was not there. So it's a part of that game. That is what makes it more interesting for us, and also probably more interesting for the divine, whose game it is, that we have this free will available, and what we do based on that free will, whether it is at the level of an action or whether it is sometimes even at the level of thought or word, it becomes a part of our karma and takes us a few steps forwards or a few steps backwards. So it has an implication in terms of the what it does to our spiritual journey, making it a little shorter or a little longer. The implications are not in terms of reward and punishment. So that's how one can look at free will and karma. Karma has a lot more complexity also to it, which you find in the life divine. But then if one has to be prepared for going to the root of a complex issue, one has to be also prepared to digest a little complexity. Otherwise, the solution is the usual simplistic way of thinking, looking upon God as a super judge who is just sitting there judging us and rewarding us for the good things that we do and punishing us for the wrong things that we do. That is a simplistic way of looking at it. There is a grain of truth in it, but at the same time, the implications as looked at from a higher level, the way Sri Aurobindo has done in the Life Divine, does involve a certain complexity.
May I add a question, sir?
Sure. What's your name?
Vishal, sir.
Vishal Gupta. Yes.
Yes, sir. So my question comes because I have an understanding that psychic being always guides us to do harmonious things. That is my understanding. I could be wrong. So when Arjun had a dilemma whether I should kill my people or not, in the pursuit of my dharma, he was told that it's okay to kill. So the voice that came to him, I should not kill, one could justify it as that it was not a psychic voice, but it was a voice of the ego. I wanted your clarification on this.
And did you attend the session on Yoga of the Gita?
No, sir, I did not.
Then you'd better go back to that class recording. You'll get a very elaborate answer to this question. But briefly, for the sake of everybody else also, that voice was not the voice of the psychic being. The fact that I should not kill can be considered a voice of the ego. because in there we saw that the choice about what the divine duty is, or the voice that comes from the psychic being, is never wrong, and it is because both these voices, whether to do one's duty as a kshatriya or whether to follow the conventional sort of morality of not indulging in violence, especially when the people involved are my kith and kin, why both these voices were secondary? Because more important than one's duty as a kshatriya, more important than one's voice, one's duty as a morally sentient being in conventional terms, more important than official duty or domestic duty or any of the other duties which we identify as duties and therefore sacred, more important than any of these duties is the divine duty, and the divine duty we discover only from the psychic being, or in case of Arjun's case, because of being lucky having Sri Krishna in front of him, that he could discover only from Sri Krishna. And that is the conclusion where the Gita also finally takes him, so that he voluntarily says, I am ready to do whatever you tell me to do, because he realizes if supreme wisdom is in front of me, why should I use my little brain, my limited wisdom, which is based on conventional morality, to decide what is right and wrong. So it was sort of the going beyond all conventional morality, that and beyond all other considerations of duty, that divine voice becomes important. That divine voice either coming from Sri Krishna in front of you in flesh and blood, or coming from the psychic being. So you better see that class recording on the Yoga of the Gita.
Oh, thank you, sir. I'll have a look.
Question from the chat box. Do the animals also have this inner voice?
That's a difficult question, impossible to answer absolutely, but all the same, probably they do have, at least the higher animals, because they can shower a lot of unconditional love, not only on their children, but sometimes also on their masters. If somebody has a pet, the pet can shower that unconditional love on you, and therefore probably they do have, and the mother has talked about here and there about some animals, although they may look like an ordinary cat or dog, can be highly evolved, and maybe actually able to evolve to a still higher level through what they do in this life, and maybe they are being guided to the right type of places and right type of actions through that. And we may, as sort of out of our the pride of our own species, like to believe that they'll probably not merge with the divine in that life, but be born as human beings in the next life. But then that may be only the pride of our species. Who knows? A dog may be able to reach the divine straight away. From dog, he may become one with the divine, because we have that proverbial story of Yudhishthir being going with his dog, and then being finally let into the heaven with the dog. So the dog can also straight away make it to the same heaven to which we may go because of our good karmas.
Next question. How do you distinguish between a genuine inner voice and escapism? For example, a voice saying, get out of polluted, crowded Delhi and go live in Auroville or Pondicherry.
Well, I mean, it all depends upon the motives behind going to Auroville or Pondicherry. If the motive is only to escape pollution, then naturally it's not the voice of the psychic being. If that is only incidental, I said it's not that all good choices will lead to worldly gain or loss. It's a worldly gain, being away from pollution. In a way, you can call it a worldly gain. But it should not be primarily based on that. So one can have a gain. It's not that you always run into a loss. But if the motive is primarily something different, then it can be the voice from of the psychic being. That's all.
So with that, we come to the end of today's session. Tomorrow we will have another sample practical class by a different yoga teacher, Miss Preeti. So please join on time. We end with the meditative music. Thank you, everyone.